So some of you might know the show Ted Lasso, a show about a fictional American football coach from Kansas who comes to England to coach a soccer club there. The end of the first season, you have the moment that you always expect with any kind of sports thing about a coach. There has to be the inspirational speech. And here's what he says to this team that is needing to kind of be, galvanized. So I've been hearing this phrase y'all got over here that I ain't too crazy about, he says in his Midwestern drawl. It's the hope that kills you. Y'all know that? I disagree, I think it's the lack of hope that comes and gets you. See, I believe in hope. I believe in belief. Now, where I'm from, we got a saying too, yeah? Question, actually. Do you believe in miracles? So it's a little corny, right? But it actually, I think, gives us an understanding of why the show, at least in its first season, was so popular. Because it taps into something real. We are dying for hope. We are being choked by cynicism. Our own pessimism is beating us up. We cannot live without ideals, without dreaming, without the possibility that things could get better, without the expectation of things that are good and that bring us joy. It is the lack of hope that is killing us. And yet there is a reason, isn't there, that people say it's the hope that kills you. Because we know what it's like to be deeply disappointed. We know what it is to have our expectations raised up, to open our heart to the possibility of something good, only to have those expectations crushed. And it is so much harder when we're expecting something that doesn't happen. We don't want to be disappointed again. We don't want to be taken in. To be jaded is safer. And actually, it sometimes seems that cynicism is the more realistic, the more honest way of approaching the world. When we just think about all the stuff that is just going on right now, the political disorder, the economic uncertainty, the psychological and educational difficulties that our kids face, not to mention the stuff inside of us, our own fears and insecurities. When we think of all of it, it seems just too big to be made right. For things to somehow get better, well, it would take a miracle. And really only children and the naive believe in miracles, right? But what if miracles really do happen? Might it not be that our tendency to try to protect ourselves could actually keep us from seeing something truly wonderful? Is it not possible that our desire not to be hurt, our unwillingness to hope, keeps us from experiencing a joy at something that has taken place? I had a friend who this was kind of true of for this person. He had a really difficult upbringing, never really experienced a confidence in the love of his parents, and so he always felt like he needed to strive to get people's approval. He always had to fight for people's attention. And when he became an adult, something truly wonderful happened. The woman he loved him back. Not for anything he achieved, just for him. It felt miraculous. And because of that, he had an enormously difficult time trusting it. He was constantly uncertain of their relationship. He was constantly feeling the need to somehow get her approval, and he was often jealous when the relationship felt threatened. There was something beautiful and wonderful that if he only had eyes to see, he could enjoy, but his unwillingness to trust, his unwillingness to hope, kept him from seeing and experiencing it. Could that be you as well? Wouldn't it be tragic if there was something that had happened so wonderful that it would fully change your life and give you long and lasting joy, but because you were afraid to hope, you missed out on it? That, I would suggest, is actually the story, what we just saw in the passage that Gretchen just read. We have been working through the Gospel of Mark from the very beginning of this calendar year. And if you have been paying attention, then when we get to in this passage, there is no surprise, there is no plot twist. This is exactly what Jesus has been preparing us for. He again and again in the last half of the Gospel of Mark, what has he said? I am going to be handed over, I'm going to die, and then on the third day I'm going to rise. Again and again. 5 times he says, on the third day I will rise, or something to that effect. And it's not just words. We have seen throughout the Gospel of Mark that Jesus is somehow filled with life, so that all he needs to do is say a few words or even touch someone, and they are filled with life. So the paralyzed suddenly move, the blind see. Even at one point, he takes a girl who has died, and he takes her by the hand and he says, little girl, get up, and her life is suddenly returned to her because he is so full with life. And so when he says, I am going to rise again, there is every reason to take that seriously. And yet, did you notice how our passage begins? We have these 3 women that are named, 2 Marys and a woman by the name of Salome. And are they saying, I wonder what's going to happen on the third day? Is he going to rise? Just wait till the third day. No. What do we see them doing? It says that on Saturday night, they go into the market to buy spices. And then on Sunday morning, do they kind of have an expectation, wondering, what will we see? Could he be alive? No. What are they talking about as they are walking? They very early on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb, and they were saying to one another, who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance of the tomb? That's what they're paying attention to. Because what they have seen in the last few days is just so big, so awful, that like that heavy stone, it seems utterly immovable. They have just seen the worst miscarriage of justice ever, as a corrupt government that's supposed to do right did wrong, and as the Roman military who just looked on without caring. They have seen the horrors of Jesus bloodied and brutalized. They have seen the cruelty of death, and it is so enormous that it seems that it is definitive. Perhaps like many of us, it is impossible for them, I think, at that moment, to believe that death and evil don't have the final word. And yet, in this morning, in the cool and the quiet, as they walk and they approach the tomb as the sun is just beginning to rise, there are a couple things that surprise them. Verse 4, and looking up, they saw that the stone had been rolled back. And then when they're entering the tomb, they saw a young man sitting on the right side. Have you ever been in a situation where what you see, you just can't even understand what you're seeing because it seems so out of place? I remember when I was a kid one time in a grocery store seeing my teacher. And when she said hi to me, I almost stepped back, who is this stranger? Because, teachers live in schools. They don't belong in grocery stores. It took me for a moment to even understand what was going on. I think something like that is happening here with these women. When Mark tells us that it's a young man, we know it's an angel. Matthew tells us it's an angel, but he's wanting us to understand what it looks like from the perspective of these women. They're seeing, but they're not seeing. But we see it, right? It's not hard to connect the dots. Jesus has said again and again, on the third day, I will rise. It's the third day, and what do we see? The stone is rolled away. An angel is in the tomb, and most importantly, what is not in the tomb is a body. We know what this means. For the longest time, if we might talk about humanity battling death, it's not really a battle. It's been a blowout. If we were to keep score until this point, it'd be death 50 billion, humanity 0. But no longer. The body is gone because death has been conquered, which seems like a pretty big deal. But again, the women don't see it. What is their reaction? We see that they are alarmed. It doesn't compute. And so the angel says, not surprisingly, do not be alarmed, which incidentally I think is kind of angel protocol. I've noticed that like every passage in the Bible, if an angel speaks to someone, it seems like that's where they begin, and it never seems to work. Do not be alarmed. You seek Jesus of Nazareth, right? The one who was crucified. He is risen. You can see, look over here. There is no body. He is not here. And the women should know what that means. The angel is saying, just like Jesus said he is going to rise, and he is risen, which means everything else Jesus has said is also true. And the women for 2 years have been listening to Jesus talk about this kingdom that he's bringing, a kingdom unlike any other, a kingdom where everything wrong will be once again made right. A kingdom where good will conquer evil, where sorrow will be overcome by joy, where death will be swallowed up by life. And now he is risen, which means he is the king he said he was, which means his kingdom now has come, which means all of these awful things that seem so immovable actually have an expiration date, and beyond it, there is something beautiful and good. But notice again how the women respond. What do they do after hearing this gospel? This is the news of the resurrection. They're the first people who ever hear that Jesus has risen. And what do? Verse 8, they went out and they fled from the tomb, for trembling and astonishment had seized them, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. The first reaction ever to the news that Jesus has risen from the dead is sheer terror. It's interesting, isn't it? I think what we have here is we have women who finally have come to recognize that something supernatural has taken place. I think they know that they are in the presence of something holy, and maybe deep down they even begin to realize that Jesus has risen from the dead, and the reaction finds this somewhat unpleasant, threatening, frightening. Because here's the thing, when one comes to recognize that they are in the presence of the true God, the holy, eternal God, it's not uncommon for us to start noticing ourselves, to recognize the shame that we've normally hidden from our eyes, to see the failure, the unworthiness, the sin. When we realize that we are encountering God, our natural tendency is to hide. And so these women run. Which shows that once again, they have not been listening carefully. Because you notice that there's one more thing that the angel says, a message that he relays in verse 7, where he says, "Go, tell his disciples and Peter that he is going before you to Galilee. There you will see him just as he told you." I'm fairly convinced that Jesus, right when he rises, speaks to the angels, says, "Here's the message that I have to give to you. Tell the disciples, and especially tell Peter, that we will meet again in Galilee, just like I said." Why this message? Why especially Peter? Because, of course, Jesus knows that his disciples, and especially Peter, have failed him. He knows that when he was arrested, they all ran away. He knows that Peter on 3 different times, faced with the opportunity to confess Jesus, denied him 3 different times. And he knows that it's devastating to them, that their failure, perhaps even in this moment, is bringing them to a place of despair where they think there is no possibility of ever being able to return to a relationship with Jesus. And Jesus is saying, tell them that I will meet them again. Tell them that I still love them. Tell them that they are forgiven. Because the good news of the resurrection is actually more even than just that death has been conquered. It's even more than a new world is coming. The news of the resurrection declares something beautiful to you and to me, and that is that in Christ we are forgiven. Death is not just the natural consequences of evolution. Death is the judgment upon us for turning away from the God of life. It is the curse that has been placed upon humanity. It pronounces something about who we are, which means the resurrection, where Jesus, our representative, is brought back to life, is God's definitive declaration saying the curse is removed. Your sin is taken away. They are forgiven. There is nothing more that stands between you and me. You are welcome home. You are loved. You are forgiven. That is the good news of the gospel that comes to us in the resurrection of Jesus. But the thing about forgiveness is anyone who truly experiences deep forgiveness, it always feels, well, miraculous. Which means it can be very difficult to trust. And so these women, at least in this moment, cannot hear it, cannot believe it. They leave afraid. Now, that's not how their story ends. We know that soon Jesus will come to them, will speak to them, will reassure them. He will come to the disciples and enable these women and the disciples to move from fear to unadulterated joy. But Mark wants to focus us on this moment so that we can see something important. That it is entirely possible to have everything right in front of you, to have joy right before you, and to completely miss it because you're afraid to hope. We have it all right in front of us, don't we? Could that be your story? I mean, think about it. We have the empty tomb, something that even Jesus' greatest enemies could never refute. We have witness accounts here of seeing Jesus, not just seeing the risen Jesus, but talking with him, being able to touch him. We have the letters of the Apostle Paul, one who first opposed Jesus and Christianity until he encountered the risen Jesus and his life was changed, and letter after letter speaks of that change. And we have Jesus' lasting testimony in this world, the strange and often awkward, but also strangely beautiful people that are called the church. Have you ever thought about how impossible the story of the church actually is? A few dozen Jews following a peasant leader sees their leader utterly humiliated and killed. How does that movement continue? And not only does it continue, but those few people who follow this crucified king end up going everywhere throughout the world, willingly laying down their life and dying to tell other people about it. And those people believe, and somehow over time, this movement that began so small and so humbly ends up being bigger and more powerful than the Roman Empire. So that now, throughout the world, more than 1 billion people confess this one person who was crucified as their king. How in the world could something like that happen? It's miraculous. It's because of the resurrection. It's all here. You see it, right? If you find that not enough, let me ask you why. Is it perhaps because you have already decided that the idea of a resurrection is just something that you can't be open to? Is it because you have determined that you want to keep yourself safe, that you want to keep yourself from being taken in? So in C.S. Lewis's very final book of the Narnia series, near the very end of it, he tries to I think, depict what the end of time will be like. And all of the characters that we come to love throughout the series, Peter and Lucy and Eustace and Diggory, they all come together in the end as this royalty, as having brought to the end in triumph. And they're in a world that is beautiful with blue sky and trees and grass and fruit that is delicious, and sadness is almost all gone. But there's this one group that's somehow in this beautiful situation, and yet they're not in it at the same time. And that's the dwarfs. If you know the story, the dwarfs in the last battle are like the religious skeptics. They are a group of people who will not believe one thing, they won't believe the other. They certainly won't believe some crazy story about the lion. If they don't see it, they don't believe it. They say the dwarfs are for the dwarfs. We're not going to be taken in. And so in this moment, you see these dwarfs, there's this beauty all around them, all huddled together in this circle, not looking around. And Edmund comes and he talks to the dwarves and he asks, why don't you look around? Why don't you see stuff? And the dwarves respond, see? Your eyes must be darn good ones if you can see and hear, one of the dwarves named Diggle says. And where? Asks Edmund. Why, in this pitch-black, pokey, smelly little hole of a stable. And the children do everything they can. They try to make it clear that, of course, they're not in a stable. They're in this beautiful outdoors. At one point, Lucy takes some violets and brings it right under the nose of this dwarf. And the dwarf says, what do you mean by shoving that stable litter in my face? Aslan eventually comes, the great lion that is their hope. And when he roars his loud roar, the dwarves hear it, but they assume that it just might be someone who's trying to trick them. At one point, Aslan, and I think he's doing this to show the kids the situation, gives miraculously a feast to these dwarves. And the dwarves eat it. They start chowing down on what actually is fine wines and fantastic food. But they say that all they're experiencing is trough water and hay they think they're eating. And they say as they're munching, well, at any rate, we haven't let anyone take us in. The dwarfs are for the dwarfs. And then Aslan says to Lucy, you see, they will not let us help them. They have chosen cunning instead of belief. Their prison is only in their own minds, yet they are in that prison. And they are so afraid of being taken in that they cannot be taken out. Could that be you this morning? Could you find yourself in a prison, keeping yourself from the joy of feasting and the glory of the resurrection because you are so concerned not to be taken in that you can't be taken out? Because let me tell you, what has happened is everything. There was an interview with someone who I see very much as an example for me, a guy by the name of Tim Keller, who is a pastor in Manhattan. The interview happened a few years ago. He had found out a year earlier that he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, which is terminal. He knew he didn't have much long to live. He ended up living 2 more years. And in this interview, someone asked him, if you had to give a word of advice to the young Christian who is scared about the future, what would you say? And his answer, well, okay, let me just say something that Kathy, that's his wife, and I have talked to each other about in the last year. If Jesus Christ was actually raised from the dead, If he really got up, walked out, seen by hundreds of people, talked to them, if he was raised from the dead, then you know what? Everything's going to be all right. Whatever you're worried about right now, whatever you're afraid of, everything is actually going to be okay. Because he goes on to say, you need to remember, we're not just talking about resurrected people. We're not just talking about we're talking about a resurrected world. Christianity says that it's not just your bodies that are being resurrected, but that it's a material world that is cleansed from all evil and suffering and sin. If Jesus Christ is raised from the dead, then in a sense, the whole world is going to be resurrected. And everything is going to be okay. Everything. You don't know how. I don't know how. But it will be. Listen, Kathy and I, we cried a lot last night. Sometimes the reality of the shortness of what we have left here just overwhelms us. And we were just weeping together and crying. And then you say, if Jesus Christ was raised from the dead, it's going to be okay. And then you can wipe your tears. I want to say to all of us, to me as well as you this morning, that this is real. That this is good. That this is not just another example of something where you get your hopes up only to be dashed. This is everything. Jesus really did rise from the dead 2,000 years ago. And that means everything is really going to be okay for those who trust in Jesus. It's going to be more than okay. Everything in Christ will be wonderful. And I invite us even now to respond by turning to this God rather than hiding from him as we come to realize more about who he is and what he has done, but to hear his announcement that we are forgiven in Christ and to turn to him, to ask him for help, to acknowledge wherever our sins are, that we might experience the reality of his forgiveness proclaimed to us in the resurrection. Let's take a couple of minutes in quiet to pray to God, whatever is on our hearts, and then I'll lead us in prayer in a couple of minutes' time.